I mentioned before, at the beginning of the meditation, about tradition, supposed to be the Theravada or whatever small vehicle, but also that the teachers who you come to listen to here are all part of another part of Buddhism, which we always call the forest tradition. And it's not a new word, it's an old word which has been around a long time, what's called in the ancient Buddhist language the Aranyavasi. But there is a reason why, like monks like myself or the nuns down at Kichiganap, live in the forests, live in nature, because it's part of our tradition to learn much of our understanding and wisdom by being inside nature, within nature. Unfortunately, as you all know, that city dwellers, I was going to say city slickers, people who live in town, that sometimes we are divorced from much of nature. But being in these monasteries where we can go to, and you can go and stay, being part of nature gives you more insights. And this evening's talks I was going to be elaborating on sort of the wisdom which comes from living in the forest or living within nature, and how much of what we call as Buddhism is not what you learn from books. It's not sort of an intellectual tradition, as many of you who have come here for many years know. This is not about learning details and learning facts and putting that into practice in your daily life to solve problems, to bring peace and happiness. It's more like learning skills, insights, little nuggets of wisdom which you do pick up from the observation of life around you. And one of the richest veins of insight gold is to be found in the nature which surrounds one. Unfortunately, in cities we're sort of divorced of nature, but not totally. We can go to many places, and just this is the summertime now, and many of you will go down to the beach. And if you can go and find a quiet part of the beach, a quiet part of the beach where there's not many people frolicking and swimming, and just look at the ocean. Why do people always like to call those sea views peaceful? What is it about the ocean which gives rise to a sense of peace inside of a person? And one of the greatest things is that ocean is usually empty. There's usually nothing on it. If you see a ship or a container ship, then it spoils that view. But of course, there's not that many ships you see on the ocean unless you go to Fremantle. But most of the parts of the ocean which you can see, there's nothing on it, and it gives you this wonderful sense of the stillness and the peace and the beauty of emptiness. And it's the same when you go up to the mountainscapes. Fortunately, in our monasteries built on the hills, there are many places where you can go and walk and you can see these great views. Certainly in Bodhinyana Monastery in Serpentine, you can look over many, many miles from Mandurah to the south to almost to Perth in the north, and see this great seascape, and it's a very beautiful view. But sometimes as a monk I ask, why is that beautiful? Why is that inspiring? And it's because there's nothing between you and all that great distance. There's something which you learn from the emptiness and the vastness of nature, which sometimes, especially if you go walking in St. George's Terrace, where I was the other day, and you're so hemmed in, and there's no sense of space, and in that no sense of space is an absence of this idea of freedom. In space there is freedom. In emptiness there's the ability to roam unhindered. And I've learnt a lot from that, because why is it that when we do have space, we tend to fill it up? Why is it that when there is a mountain, we either put a flag on the top, or a restaurant, or these days a mobile phone tower? Why can't we leave the mountain tops free? And it's the same with other places. Why can't, when you have a house, have a wall in your house where there's no painting to be hung, where there's no vase in the corner, where it's totally empty? Why is it that we tend to fill things up And sometimes we're afraid of emptiness, when we just have to look in nature and those vast views from those lookout points of life where you can see such a great distance, give you such an inspiration of peace and freedom born of that emptiness. So whenever I've gone to those places in forests, wherever there's a mountain, and actually seen these great distances, you realize just why such great distances of beauty, what really beauty is. Beauty is always accompanied by this, I'm talking about the real beauty, the state of freedom, being unencumbered with no hindrances. And I can't avoid one of the stories which I wrote about in the book Open the Door of Your Heart, which again, this was not in a mountain top as such, but in a man-made mountain in the middle of the jungle, when as a 18-year-old I went off to Central America. And I was always fascinated by these great pyramids which lay in the middle of the jungle. I remember getting a book out once and saying, wow, I want to go and see one of these. And so of course I managed to have the opportunity to go there, but it's not an easy place to go, especially when you haven't got hardly any money, and just managed to get a cheap bus to Guatemala City, and then from there just get on another really cheap bus to get to the port city, and from there waiting for a fishing boat, which you just give them $1 and they take you up the coast, and then along one of these rivers, one of these old jungle rivers. And I will never remember that, forget that experience. This was in 1969, and seeing just Indians in a dugout canoe, naked, and just being in a world which has vanished now, real rainforest, which had been unconquered by humans, and just a few people living on the banks. And from there just taking a back of a truck, literally sitting on the top of I don't know what sort of produce, to make your way to an island city in the middle of the jungle called Flores, and from there rickshaws or whatever to get to this temple complex in the middle of the jungle. It's a great tourist place now. I've heard they built an airstrip there and people can go there for the day, and I'm sure that you can have a McDonald's food at the foot of those great pyramids, but in those days no one was there. And so an 18-year-old, a male, what do you do when you see these great pyramids? Climb up them. That's what I want to do, because that's just a male idea. But what awaited me at the top was quite unexpected. Now, to understand what I experienced from this natural phenomena of these pyramids in the jungle was to, first of all, to let you know, it took me about 3 days to get to these places from Guatemala City. And for those 3 days, especially once you started traveling up the river, that the rivers were totally covered by the jungle canopy. Not just on the sides of the river, but this was rainforest, virgin rainforest, and so the trees grew up and over the river like a roof. And it's the same with the roads which ran through the jungle. They were cut through the jungle, just single-track roads of dirt. But the jungle was so vibrant, full of life, that it would cover over the top, so you were going through tunnels. And that's what it was like for 3 days of going through tunnels through the jungle. And when I got to this temple complex and walked up and climbed up the top of this pyramid, what I noticed, and it was striking, that the top of the pyramid was just above the tree line. So now, standing on the top of one of those pyramids, you could see forever. The first time in 3 days I could see long distances. And as they say, it blew my mind. I'd only been 3 days in the jungle, but I realized what it would be like for a person born in the jungle, spent all their life in the jungle, grown up in the jungle. You were never seen long distances. And now for the first time, on top of that pyramid, you could see forever, which as I thought at the time, with nothing between you and the infinite. No words, no dogma, no religion, between you and forever. Emptiness all around, surrounding you. And that was so beautiful and so peaceful to see unencumbered to the edges of the universe as it seemed. And not only that, because on top of that pyramid you look down, and you could see the tree canopy, again stretching forever. But amidst that tree canopy you could actually work out the road where you'd come, and the rivers, days of travelling, because it was hard work just to travel just a few miles. You could actually see all that from above, like a bird's eye view, like a Google map of your universe. That's what it looked like. And I realized just the importance of those experiences. Not only just seeing your life, as it were, spread out before you, your path where you'd come from, and where you'd be going next, because you were above, beyond, outside, but looking down. And most importantly, just seeing the great emptiness spreading forever. It reminded me what it was like when you have these places on the top of the mountains, or these viewpoints where you can see forever, or just being by the ocean, seeing these great distances unspoiled, empty of things. And I realized that one of the greatest things of nature is its emptiness, is its space, is its freedom. I'd have read of people who've had the privilege of going up in these great rockets into outer space and being struck by the vastness and emptiness, of the universe, of space. There's something about that which is beautiful, but at the same time humbling. Because the more vast is the space around you, the more insignificant is this person inside of us, which we worry and care and strive about for so much. Basically, it puts us into perspective. So whenever you do go by the beach and watch that ocean, not only are you seeing vastness outside, but you're actually putting a sense of perspective on this person inside, which you are so worried and concerned about. Which is one of the other reasons why not only does it give you a sense of beauty, but a deep sense of peace as well. Because most of the turmoil in our lives is worrying about who we are and how we're faring in this so-called human race. And it is a race to succeed, to be good, to be better, whatever it is one aspires for in this life. If one is aspiring for something, if one has a goal, there's always a race to get to that end. And when we look at the vastness of the ocean, or the vastness of the land when we're sitting on top of a mountain or on top of a pyramid, we can just see just all of those things which not only just motivate us, but cause us so much suffering and trouble, are put in perspective. And we feel, what's the problem? The more we lessen our concern about ourselves, the more we put ourselves in our proper place, I think the more peace and happiness we have. We're always measuring ourselves against our goals, and often, unfortunately, measuring ourselves against others, and putting all these words of good, bad, better, worse in front of ourselves, comparing. But there's something in the top of that pyramid, when you see such emptiness and you're just a speck, where all of that craving, aspiration and striving for perfection sometimes just vanishes. And you just are in the middle of this great encompassing, embracing, and I would say accepting emptiness. The space accepts you and doesn't reject you. And it's the same with the feeling of an ultimate reality. Many people in spiritual life and in religion are seeking for the love of an ultimate. What they're seeking for is an acceptance. And sometimes nature accepts you that way. You are part of things rather than being separate. This is one thing which you have noticed when you are in a forest especially. When I first went to that forest where we now live in Serpentine, Bodhinyana Monastery, I remember just seeing all these dead trees. There was dieback in the area, Jara dieback, which means that the fungus in the roots deprives the flow of nutriment, especially moisture, and the furthest leaves and twigs from the roots generally die, and that death just goes back to the trunk. That's why it's called dieback. And many trees had succumbed to that dieback. And of course, because I was a stupid monk, I thought, let's cut those imperfect trees down, because I thought a forest should only have young, beautiful, alive trees. And of course, after a while, someone taught me about the nature of a forest in Australia. Because in those dead trees, those skeletons, which I thought had no purpose and no beauty, inside each one of those, there were many animals depended for their home. They would make nests and homes in those dead trees. There would be refuges for so many of the fauna which lived in the Australian forest. And if I was cutting them down, I was destroying the homes of so many beings. When I learned that, I learned to respect those trees which I once thought of as ugly and useless. And it opened my eyes to much else which I didn't understand at first in the nature of a forest. Much which I thought was ugly and which needed to be fixed, I realized had a purpose, had a use, and had a beauty all of in itself. Even the trees in those forests, you can see, I can't see one tree in that forest where I live which is perfect. In the sense they go straight up vertically, and all of their branches are just evenly spaced, and all their leaves are nice and green. I've never seen a tree without a brown leaf or a yellow leaf, without something broken, without a scar in the trunk. There's not one tree which is perfect in that forest. But I've been to other forests where the trees are perfect, where they're all in nice lines and rows, and I think you know what I'm talking about. Those are the ones which have been planted by the Department of Forestry, or CALM as they call it here. And if you've ever been into one of those plantations, do they look beautiful? Are they really attractive places to hang out? Or would you rather be in what we call a natural forest, with all its scars and so-called imperfections? People who have come to, say, a monastery like Bodhinyana Monastery in Serpentine call it beautiful. But if you look at any of those trees, not one of the trees is perfect. That is why it's beautiful. I learned from that, from observing that natural part of Australia, that what real beauty is. Real beauty has another meaning than our understanding of perfection. And in the same way, if I look at all the monks which I've lived with or living with now, not one of those monks is perfect, but that's why they're all beautiful. They've all got their little idiosyncrasies, their stupidities, the little things which could drive you crazy if you didn't understand what beauty really was. Imagine two trees standing next to each other, and the tree, look at you over there, you're all bent and gnarled, but look at you, you've missed so many branches. But of course, what I'm talking about is human beings, a husband and wife. Two trees standing next to each other, seeing all their faults rather than understanding what their beauty truly is. By learning what real beauty is by watching the trees in the forest, you understand that beauty is nothing to do with our idea of perfection. The beauty is actually embraces imperfection. Beauty embraces the faults in people. And if a person was perfect, they would not be beautiful at all. They'd be plastic, not real. They would be unnatural. So if any of you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you have a partner, a husband or wife, a child or a parent, or even a monk, don't expect them to be perfect. If they were, they would not be beautiful. Now, understanding that makes you more tolerant and more able to live with other people and to see their beauty. And more important, as I was saying last week, more able to live with yourself. Because when you understand the beauty of a forest, you understand the beauty of yourself. You don't have to be perfect to be beautiful. And in fact, the more perfect you are, the more ugly you are. It's a nice way of looking at it. And that's actually what nature is like. The more perfect a mountain is. I know that they have these mountains, and it's supposed to be like Mount Fuji is supposed to be the most perfect mountain in the world. But I don't like that. It's just as if it was made by sort of some engineer. But real mountains they are just all craggy. And you can never design them. It's just been eroded by nature. And that gives them a sort of beauty. And the other thing about beauty is you just can't capture it. You try and take a photograph of the forest, and you've got photographs of Bodhinyana Monastery, but they're totally different of the place where you live. And I've seen those photographs which are in the newsletter, and I look at the place where I live, and it's not the same. You can't capture beauty and keep it forever. It is always changing. I remember a time, it must have been just because past lives, but I was always fascinated just, with India, and especially with the Himalaya mountains. And once I decided to go to India, to go on a pilgrimage, to try and find a few of the Buddhist holy places. I was a Buddhist at this time. I was 20, 21, 22. To go off to India, see these holy places, but I also, one of my goals was to see the Himalaya mountains. And of course I was stupid. And I never did any research, because when I got to India, it was monsoon season. And monsoon season meant there were clouds covering the sky, day after day after day. And after about a month in India, I realized in North India, no way were you going to see these mountains. So I actually gave up. And I remember one day I was in Nepal, and there used to be, staying with other travelers, there was this great sort of opportunity to go in the post truck, which would go to the border of Tibet, still belonging to the People's Republic of China. You couldn't go over the border, but you can just go next to Tibet, this forbidden land, this magical place of Tibetan monks. And I thought, wow, it'd be really good just to see it. So we got on this post truck and just gave the driver, probably illegal, $1 or something just to take us up there. And when he stopped for tea, halfway up, to the Tibetan border, he stopped for tea. And I was with a couple of Americans, and there was a little hill, not a very high hill. Let's climb to the top. Nothing else to do. So we climbed to the top. And as we climbed to the top, like a miracle, the clouds cleared. And for the first time, and I've been there about 2 months, you could actually see the whole Himalaya mountains. And it was magical. It was amazing beauty. So what did I do? This is the third time I called myself stupid today. Being really stupid, I ran down the hill. What for? To get my camera. It was a great experience, as if it was done on purpose just to teach me a lesson. Because I ran up again, and as soon as I got to the top, literally, no exaggeration, the clouds closed. And these two Americans were saying, "Where did you go? That was just so amazingly beautiful." And I'd missed it. Why? Because I tried to capture it. And that taught me a wonderful lesson about nature, about even happiness and joy. You can't capture moments. And if you do, you miss them. So now, whenever I have any happiness and joy, you don't try and capture it, neither in a photograph nor taking notes, or trying to even describe it to yourself and saying, I must remember this, I must remember this, I must remember this. Because every time I try to remember it, I'm avoiding the experience, I'm missing out the action. So for me, the beauty and joys in life are there to be tasted, never to be captured. Because as soon as you try and capture these things, you lose them immediately. And these are things which you learn from living in nature. The joys and the happiness are just there in moments. And there is a sense of imperfection there. I often notice this just in the mornings and the evenings. You get up early in the morning and you can see just the dawns. I love the dawns. One of the best parts of the day. That's why it's great to get up early. The evenings are very noisy because human beings are still around. But the early mornings, there's very few people get up. And it's as if you own those mornings. And you don't need to share them with others because they're still in bed, half asleep. And in those early mornings, you can get up and you see these beautiful sunrises. But just like the sunsets, the most beautiful ones are calm and free, but with a little bit of imperfection. Without the clouds or the dust on the horizon, you would never get the beautiful spreads of golds, crimsons, and purples, which make the sunsets so gorgeous. You need those imperfections there. And sometimes when the sky is perfectly clear, like some of these mornings, with not a cloud in the sky, the sunset is dull. The sunrise is bland. You do need that little bit of imperfection to give beauty in life. So straight away, just from observing nature, you've learned what beauty truly is. And why it's beautiful. Because it's you, with your imperfections, with your space, with your freedom just to be, rather than having this idea of perfection which stops people enjoying life and enjoying another person's company. If you try and make the other person perfect, or you want to be perfect, with this stupid idea of perfection, yeah, I know you're going to stay, with the imperfection, that's the real perfection. But people's ideas of perfection, that is the problem. And it's because we have these wrong ideas of perfection. That's why we argue with each other. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? And so, every week when we meditate, those dogs bark. They're perfect dogs. There'd be something very wrong with them if they didn't bark. That's why you have to send them to the doctor. Have you ever seen a dog which doesn't bark? But that's why they're beautiful. Because they're imperfect. Or the baby just singing at the end of the meditation. I don't know if it was singing or something, but isn't that wonderful? Isn't that joyful? Now, if one thinks that we have to have absolute silence, if we think that dogs should be seen and not heard, if we think that crows should be banished from Western Australia because they make this terrible ga 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 noise, according to Buddhism, why people get reborn as crows? The karmic cause of being reborn as a crow is saying nasty things about your husband or your wife. And you get reborn as a crow, obviously. Ga 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 ga. Well, I'm only making that up, don't quote me on that. But that's what crows do. And it's beautiful having those crows. I just was at a ceremony yesterday, and apparently the Noongar land is the land of the crow and the cockatoo, the area around Perth. These are the native icons of this country. They've been here such a long time. So why can't we see these beautiful crows and see their noise as beautiful, as delightful? And then you can see that many of the things which irritate us in life, it's the nature of a crow to do things like that. As I've been telling you for many months now, if ever you get married, it's the nature of a husband to sound like that. It's the nature of a wife to sound like that. That's what they're like. They nag, 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 nag. And there are a few people over here who used to go off to up north, on the mines for many weeks. And sometimes they'd actually say that it's a very good money over there, but sometimes they miss their family and they miss their wife. And I was really suggesting, I was being serious about this. Look, if ever you miss your wife when you go up north in the mines, get what I call like a nagging tape. Get her to complain to you or whatever, and record it, on a CD. Whenever you miss your wife, you can listen to the nagging tape. That was only a bit of a joke, but nevertheless, I think I could have made a lot of money on that. But never mind. There was this one person here. I won't tell the name of it. A few people remember this couple. I was a Thai lady married to a Chinese man, and they would come to offer food every weekend. I don't know if it was a Saturday or Sunday. And she was one of these people. What the word is, like a battle axe. And she was just so hard on her husband, in public too. It was so embarrassing even for me to hear this, let alone for him. George, 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 come over here. George, don't be stupid. And she just gave George such a hard time. And this was in public. I don't know what it'd be like in private. And then she died. And after she died, we thought, oh, poor George. George will probably be very happy now. That's what I thought, having this person giving me such a hard time over all these years. But he came up to me and said, I miss her so much. I miss being nagged. But actually interesting part of that story with George and this other lady who died, that it came to the point where actually that she mistrusted her husband so much that she, in her will, she gave half of her property to the Buddhist Society here if we would pay for the funeral for her, because she didn't trust her husband would pay for the funeral. And that was a very bad thing, but I passed it by the committee and said, well, that's her wish. So when she died, we performed the funeral service and the Buddhist Society paid. And then when it came down to getting the will, just after a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I asked him about the will. And he said he couldn't find it. And so we waited for a while, couldn't find it. And then he came to the monastery one day. He said he found the will. I said, how did you find the will? He said, last night in bed I heard this word, George, 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 get that will. And he was so scared. So be careful. Sometimes these ghosts, if you don't do the right thing, they'll come and nag you after you die. But anyhow, let's go back to sort of learning from nature. I don't know how I got onto that one, but nevertheless. When you're actually in nature, there's so much which you can learn about nature. Also, one of the things which you learn by being around the jungle animals, all these animals which are supposed to be so frightening, especially the snakes. Maybe the snakes I've seen so many of. And, you've stepped on snakes. I remember in this one part of Thailand where it was very remote and just spending time by myself. When you're alone in the jungle, that's when you start to notice more. I remember just going in my hut and stepping on this poor snake. You could feel just the cold body on the instep of your foot. And straight away I jumped, and the snake jumped as well. Fortunately in opposite directions. I remember looking at this snake, and this snake was afraid, and I was afraid, and looking at one another, and forgiving one another. And don't think animals don't have any intelligence. They're incredibly intelligent beings. This is one of the reasons why we respect the animal kingdom as Buddhists. Maybe because the Buddhist monks and nuns, we live in the jungle, we live in the forest, we live in nature and the mountains, we observe, and you get far more respect for the animal realm once you've lived with them a lot. I remember one of the trainees there, he wanted to test out an ant nest. The ant hills we have in West Australia? He put a sugar cube on the top of an ant's nest. Knowing that they love the sugar, but what would they do with it? Because it was a sugar cube and the little holes are just too big to pull the sugar down. So it was a test, an intelligence test on the ants. You know how the ants solve this? Great engineers. They took the earth from under the sugar cube. They excavated underneath, and day after day that sugar cube got lower and lower and lower. And once it was at the level of the earth, they covered it over again. And that's the way they took it down to their storeroom in the middle of their nest. It's a brilliant sort of solution to a problem. That's actually how the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War would actually bury the tanks. They'd excavate it from underneath, so they go down, down, down. Little things like that show the intelligence of the natural world, and that's why we learn how to respect that natural world. And also we realize that we're not that much different from the animal realm. We're not so superior. And that knowledge of just how animals and human beings are so similar was one of the reasons which convinced me of things like reincarnation or rebirth, because people keep asking the same old question. How can there be reincarnation when there are more people alive today probably than ever have died? Where do we all come from? And the answer is very simple. It's because that the animal realm has been declining, and so many people who would normally be reborn as animals are now reborn as human beings. Which explains the behavior of some young people today. I said this actually to a family a couple of days ago. They had a couple of little children, you see. Now you understand why your two little children behave like little monkeys. They probably were monkeys in their last life. But when you actually see nature, I remember just in the same monastery where I stepped on the snake, and the snake went in its direction because I was kind to it. One of the things when you're living with nature is actually you learn how to live with human beings as well. Because the animals, they're dangerous, but you've got to respect them. And also give what we call the gift of fearlessness. So when you respect the animals, you try not to step on them. I apologize for stepping on that little snake. It was my fault. I should have been looking where I was going. It was also the snake's fault for coming into my hut. But nevertheless, we forgave each other. And that way, you don't have this, you have this fearlessness towards one another. This respect. And in just the same way that you can have fearlessness, I'm not going to harm you, snake. I'm not going to harm you, little ant. I'm going to respect you. And with that degree of giving fearlessness to other people, you can practice maybe on animals first of all, and then you can give it to the people you live with. And the whole relationship, to your people you work with, and to the people you live with, even the people you meet, totally changes. Because you know how much afraid we are of other people? Sometimes these days we're afraid to go on public transport because we think we might get attacked, afraid to walk down the street, we may get raped, afraid to, even like small fears, afraid to meet other people, simply because we're not quite sure whether we'll be accepted or not. There's so much fear in our lives. And you can see that fear in the animal realm as well, but you can see that fear just totally overcome by mutual respect, acceptance, seeing the beauty in these animals, seeing the beauty in yourself, seeing the beauty in the people you work with and live with, respecting one another, and giving this beautiful sense of fearlessness. People have told me just recently that they notice whenever you come into one of our monasteries, they notice the increase in the number of bird calls as soon as they go through the gate. They notice just the kangaroos. They don't run away when they're within the boundaries of Bodhinyana Monastery, but outside they do run away. Because over 26 years of building up these monasteries, we've given the animals and all that live in that monastery the gift of fearlessness. They're respected, and so you can enjoy each other's company. And of course it's one of the great joys. You don't need to watch Nature Channel when you've got one happening right outside your front door. You have all these wonderful times with the kangaroos. Just coming, for example, one monk, he just got his one meal of the day. He was on retreat, took his meal and put it in his bowl, and he just left it on the veranda of his hut just for 1 minute when he went inside to get something. When he came out, the kangaroo had his nose in his meal. The kangaroo got to eat it first. And one of the things I found out about kangaroos, because when I've been on retreat, sometimes the excess food, you just leave it for the kangaroos. And I remember you've got to look after the wildlife. So, I had some lettuce and a carrot and an apple. I left it out for the kangaroo. What did the kangaroo do? Shove aside the apple with its nose, shove aside the carrot, shove aside the lettuce, and you know what it went for? The pizza. True. Well, we discovered that even kangaroos like junk food, just like us. I don't know it was good for it, but that's what it chose. So in the end, you can see just the way these animals are just exactly the same as us. I was going to say in this monastery in the north of Thailand where I stepped on the snake, I used to put a bowl of water out for the birds in the evening. And that's a nice thing to do. Remember, this was really remote. And hardly any human beings around there. The village was a couple of kilometers away. I put a bowl of water out, and in the hut there was a wooden hut. There was a knot in one of the planks, and I could watch as the birds came for their water. They soon found it. And what really surprised me, and this is no exaggeration, after a few days, all these birds would come, for the water. They would drink and they'd wash. You know what birds do. But what surprised me, they'd actually form a queue. And this was actually in north of Thailand. They put in one after the other. And I never realized just how sort of, respectful and orderly birds in the wild really were. But I also noticed, even though they were really orderly like that, there would always be one or two birds would try and jump the queue. And as soon as they tried that, all the other birds, they get out of their queue and they jump on that bird, beat him up until it flew away. It was like self-policing. You can even see there, just in nature, just there was a respect for some order. And seeing those parts of nature, you can understand, just as nature orders itself, so does human beings order itself. It's part of life. And we can expect that and accept that and live with that. But of course, one of the greatest things of learning with nature was just how nature does learn how to adapt. And sometimes, as human beings, we don't try and adapt. We fight too much. We try and control. Whereas nature teaches us how to adapt to the various situations of life. And of course, you know just how the Australian forest has adapted to the fires which come every now and again. Human beings, we just build these houses and they burn down and we get upset. Of course, if you build a house or a hut in a forest, one day it will burn down. I accept that. That's part of nature. When we had a huge bushfire, some of you were here to know when this happened. It was in 1991, January the 31st. I was there at the time. The night, the experience is literally burned into my memory. It's a huge bushfire. It was at the time the hottest day ever in Perth. I think we were watching in monastery, it went up to, 48 degrees, and that was before the fire hit. I think it was 46.7 or something in town at the time. A month later there was another hottest day, but that still ranks as the second hottest day ever in Perth, when a big bushfire, a crown fire, the trees exploded. And of course, when those things happen, you know you can't fight that fire. You can just take cover if you're inside. If not, just escape. So we escaped. And it was wonderful, being part of that nature, because you knew in nature you had to let things go. You knew that the monastery itself was only a temporary abiding, that one day you'll have to let it go. And I thought that was the day when I left that monastery and saw just how those trees exploded. Literally, it was like bombs going off. It was amazing, it was awesome to see. And actually, just to be honest, I was not afraid. I was just in awe of the power of nature in these bushfires, which is part of our environment. But when I left, I thought that was the end of our forest. And we went down to the southwest highway, the foot of the hill. We could see the forest burning and exploding, and that was our monastery. And for those of you who don't know, that I spent so many years, what was it? It was about 10 years building that monastery. And literally building it, laying the bricks and working all day just to get this monastery going. And there it was all burning. And it was a wonderful experience because you realize that's part of nature, you had to let it go. In the same way, when you learn from nature, you know that you have to let each other go sooner or later. When death burns you up, when you have to leave your jobs, you leave your health, you leave your kids, or your kids leave you, they will go one day. It's part of the world. I had to learn from nature to let my monastery go, and I spent so much time and effort, sweat and literally blood building that place. And it looked like it was all gone, and it was a great surprise in the morning. It really was a shock to go back the following morning and to see it was still standing. And it was a miracle. I remember going with one of the leaders of they was actually the head of, they didn't call it FISA at that time, the head of the Bushfires Board, and taking him around. And I remember him seeing one of the huts, and he looked underneath it, around it, and I can never forget his words when he looked at me and says, "Brahm, this should not be here." And it was, so it all survived. But we have to let it go one day, because that's the nature it's the nature of nature. The trees grow and then they die. They refashion themselves afterwards. Without the dead trees, there would not be the soil to grow more trees. And it's a sense that we are part of nature. It's one of the things which I recognize of being a forest monk, that you are not the owner of nature. You're not separate from nature. You're part of nature. You're immersed in the forest. You're just one of the other animals which live in the forest. That's all. So when you're part of nature, you tend not to try and control her so much. And when you don't learn how to control nature, when you learn how to live with nature, then you find one of the great secrets of a peaceful life. I think one of the problems of civilization is we try too much to control nature. And when things go so-called wrong, like an earthquake in Haiti, or a great bushfire in Victoria, or great tsunamis, and we get so upset, but these are things we have to accept. We're part of nature. And as human beings, we realize that nature is much bigger than us, and to try and control it and make it different is just a lot of suffering. In a sense of our own nature, we have to learn how to accept our own nature. Sometimes you look upon, as a Buddhist monk, you look upon your own body and think of all these years of trying to make it healthy, to feed it, to exercise it, and still it gets fat. Still it sort of gets sick, still it gets tired. You try your very best. And after a while, something clicks inside of you, just like the forest. Technically, the Buddhist Society of West Australia owns a forest called Bodhinyana Monastery, but even they don't own it. Nature owns it. And just because it says on a piece of paper that you're the proprietor, the owner, doesn't mean anything. The real owner of all of our properties is nature, and it's the same with my body. I look at my body and realize nature owns my body, not me. You just have to work with nature. When you work with nature rather than to fight nature, life becomes very different. It means when you're sick, you rest. You accept that sickness is part of life. When you get old, you work with that rather than trying to deny it. I don't know how many people just deny they're being old. When I start to make jokes about old people, people think I'm talking about someone else, but no, I'm talking about you. It's true. So why are you in denial of old age? You know that one of the great things about Buddhism, what I really liked upon it, the older you get, the more respect you get. So I was surprised but quite relieved. Like in traditional northeast Thailand, you ask a person's age, especially a woman, and they would usually add a few years onto their age. You ask people here in Australia, they take a few years off. And why they did that? Because it wasn't they were not afraid of getting old, they're actually almost looking forward to it. What's wrong with being old? Yeah, sure, there's many things you can't do, but there's other things that you can do. And hopefully, if you just, you may not be able to control your body, but be able to control your mind, become wiser and look back upon your life and what a wonderful life you've done so far. And you get sort of a sense of, there's many things which you miss from being young, but there's other things which you gain. There's always like this, what they call the swings and roundabouts, the gains and losses of getting old. So accept it, it's nature, be part of it, rather than being in denial of your nature. Because just as I say with the trees in the forest, sometimes the oldest trees, the ones which are really gnarled, maybe not so many leaves on them, are some of the most beautiful. Big, old, ancient trees in the forest. Aren't they amazing? Just like big, old, ancient people in this room today. Aren't they beautiful? So why do you want to deny this? When we realize that we can work with nature rather than fight nature, not only are we environmentally more sensitive, but we're also more sensitive as human beings to each other. Accepting ourselves and accepting others, seeing beauty where others see imperfection, seeing things we can really respect and love. And I don't know about you, but I love being around elderly people. Sometimes they get so many joyful, wise words to say, and they're not just so, what's the word, just so critical, far more accepting of others. Usually when you're very young, you're very fault-finding and you have really high ideals, but as you get older and older, maybe your ideals lessen and lessen, but I think it should get more compassionate, more wise and more tolerant. For many people anyway. So actually, those are the people I love being around. So, after a while, you can accept the nature, and same as the nature of this body, to work with it rather than to fight against it. That's what you learn living with nature. You can't fight the elements, with the heat and the cold. It's the hot weather recently, and then it gets cold again. So instead of fighting nature, we can make peace with nature. When we make peace with nature, it's the same as making peace with ourselves. We're part of nature. As I was saying last week, if you want to have a peaceful, happy life, don't try and be something different than you are. Don't fight yourselves and go to some idea of what perfection is and try to make yourself perfect. If you can make peace with yourself and love yourself, then as I said last week, you make peace with the person you live with and love them too. You can't control them or make them different. They're part of nature as well. So we accept nature. And then we can also accept the bigger nature, the bigger picture of our time on this human earth and this human life and the time on earth. And to enjoy it, make peace with it, learn as much as we can. And when it dies, we can let it go, realizing we never owned anything. All of the body which we have, the possessions which we have, the people we know, these are all people, experiences, part of nature which are with us for a while. Just like whenever I feel the wind in the forest, where it comes from, I don't know. Where it goes to, who can tell? But all I know is the wind as it caresses my face right now. All it knows are the people in front of me in this moment. Where you come from, I don't know. Where you go to, who can tell? But all we have is the caress of being together just for a few moments. And that's beautiful. And the same with the time which we spend together, just like the wind passing our face. We enjoy it. We don't try and find out where it comes from or where it goes to. Too many people philosophize. Where did life begin? Where is life going? Just like asking, where does the wind come from? Where does the wind go? But all we can only know is the wind as it's meeting our face right now. That's all we need to enjoy. We are part of nature. We are one with nature. We don't fight nature. We respect her as we respect ourselves. Learning these little things from nature makes us a much more peaceful, more accepting, and especially more in the moment. You don't see sort of the animals with cameras taking photographs and keeping albums of each other. You don't see the animals having big possessions. As I've often said, whenever I see the birds flying, and they do migrate from land to land, I've never seen any migrating bird carrying a backpack or suitcases. Which is a wonderful thing, but you go to Perth Airport and I don't know how many suitcases people carry. You don't need all that stuff. So if you can be more like a bird in life, have less possessions, be more like the top of that pyramid, more empty, more free, you find that the less possessions you have, the freer you are. And you can find the less things which you have, just the more there is nothing between you and the infinite, just like on top of those pyramids. It's wonderful living in nature, going to the top of the mountains, the lookouts, seeing the great ocean, seeing the great space, and realizing when we put something on that, when we put something on it, when we try and change it, we usually make it worse. When you try and change the person you live with, you make them worse. When you accept them as they are, there's beauty there. It's the same when you try and change yourself. Like trying to change nature, you usually mess her up. So instead, be at peace with yourself. Leave nature alone. It belongs to nature, not to you. If you know that trick, you can know some of the lessons from nature and why monks and nuns, or when we go on retreats, we love going into natural surroundings where we can learn, accept and be at peace and stop all of our craving and fighting and only to accept nature as she is. Thank you for listening. Okay, any questions or comments about this evening's talk on learning from nature? Amazing. Either you never understood a word of it, or you're totally enlightened.